Great. Good morning, everyone. Tokenization part 2 here. I think we're mis-selling the panel a little bit. We only have one regulator on the panel, but Alessandro and I can cosplay a little bit and provide some regulatory and policy views. So very delighted to be here. We only have a short 25 minutes, but we are, I think, quite happy to take a few questions at the end. So if you're in the room, you can raise your hand when we get to that section. If you're online, I believe you can send in your questions through the website, or even if you're in the room through Slido as well. So just wanted to kind of give you advance notice. So super delighted to be here. I think the last panel has already set the scene very well for us to take that discussion forward. I think just in terms of the kind of types of volumes and transactions that we're seeing in tokenized markets in Europe. My organization, AFME, is now putting out a biannual report on DLT markets. And I think last year we observed a lot of momentum across fixed income funds, repos, as well as increasing stable coin volumes. A lot of that was actually driven by the ECB trials and experiments and the Swiss National Bank's trials as well. And issued outside the pilot regime. So we'll be really interested to get your views on that, Carsten and Alessandro. So maybe just to start, Carsten, wanted to ask you a little bit about what has been observed in Europe in terms of tokenization. How would you characterize the markets, the volumes, the types of use cases you're seeing, and what is needed for further scaling?
All right, thank you, and thanks for inviting ESMA to this one. I see as the regulator I'm being squeezed in then apparently. There you go. I was going to say overall on the environment that we're in now, what we're seeing certainly is it's still relatively small scale overall. I think the areas are indeed then fixed income that you referred to already, tokenized funds, and then also tokenized wrappers for equity and other things. On the fixed income side, I think the Europe seems to be in a pretty good position. There is certainly something happening there. It is true, it is driven then by central bank experiments, but we see, supranational issuance, certain sovereign issuance, so there is something happening there. And probably, recently, year on year, what we're seeing, the biggest growth is indeed in tokenized funds, predominantly in money market funds. And then there are indeed these, wrappers for equity-like products where, we're probably going to hear from Alessandro later on because Kraken is running one of those. And then on the DLT pilot, of course, we heard quite a bit already in the previous panels. So 6 entities authorized. I think I can also reveal that there are quite a number still in the pipeline, also exceeding this number of 6. But it's still probably fair to say that the DLT pilot regime, for the many reasons that were already mentioned earlier on, had a pretty slow start. It's coming up for 3 years now. I think it applies since March 23, and yeah, it's only 6 authorized entities, and also the volumes happening there, taking place there, are relatively limited still. But, it's certainly not all bad. It is a pilot regime, and as we heard just then, it's going to be upgraded then, well, reasonably soon. Maybe if I can go off on one tangent, in the whole centralization of supervision discussion, you hear a lot of people who are opposed to the centralization of supervision to say, like, supervisory convergence is great. I can tell you supervisory convergence is a bloody difficult job. And, I've been doing it for a while at ESMA, particularly if you're dealing then with like MiCA and hundreds of entities. However, shout out to Stefan then, certainly this DLT working group is working great. And there I see, an openness, transparency between supervisors and then information sharing that, we don't see an awful lot in ESMA. And therefore, granted, it's a small number of entities, but, that's a great example of indeed supervisory convergence working.
Absolutely. And why, in ESMA's view, is tokenization important for the broader economy?
Well, again, a lot has been said. I think from the ESMA position, from the ESMA view, it is, of course, the promise of efficiency through automation. We can certainly do with that in the EU. It is the promise of 24/7 trading, of fractionalization, of easier funding, particularly for SME issuers. So all that is promising. The other, what I would consider, then important, again, very much from the ESMA, from the European perspective, is that indeed here we would create an integrated framework where we're not going to sit here again in 20 years' time and then complain about, insert name of some law professor here, barriers that stand in the way of having a true EU market.
That's great to hear. And Alessandro, really interested in your views on the benefits of tokenization as well. Obviously, we've heard a lot about cheaper, faster transactions, risk reduction, greater accessibility to capital markets, more transparency. Why is it important to sort of bridge tokenization in capital markets with other initiatives beyond capital markets? And what is Kraken doing in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Coco, for having me on the panel. So my name is Alessandro. I represent Kraken Digital Assets, which is originally a crypto exchange. We're now working on the mission of bridging that gap that exists between TradFi and the future of fintech. So it's actually great to be here today and talk about tokenization. I think it's interesting to see how tokenization and the term is changing very much. And it's moving from a niche perspective. 5 years ago, it was not even on the agenda. And today we're starting this international conference, thinking about it, commissioner is speaking about it, and we're here on a second panel about tokenization. So we see that there is a trend there that is coming, and this is going to be really disruptive. I want to, though, reframe tokenization a little bit, because I think it's important to think of it. It's not a new product. So tokenization is not a new thing itself. It's a new operating model, which is going to be adapted for markets that are traditional. So we're bringing offline assets to the online and the on-chain world. So we're bringing capital markets to go at the internet of speed. And I think that is the angle in which we should frame it. And also, it makes regulators look at it in a different way, I have the feeling. So I'm not a regulator. So this panel, I'm going to be the counterpart, let's say. I think the benefits of tokenization can fit into 3 buckets. The first one is access. It's the ability for people to invest as little as 10 euros and do it from everywhere, anywhere, as long as they have an internet connection. And this is, the power of tokenization. This is not something that people are able to do as of today in some parts of the world. The other part is what Carsten was mentioning earlier, is the fractionability, is the operationability of tokenization. So the idea that you are a young European citizen, you don't want to buy a full share of Microsoft or Tesla or whatever it is, and you can buy a fraction of it, and that it gives the ability for people to enter that theme, which is one of the objectives of the SIU, the ability for the younger generation to enter one of those aspects of investing, which is going to be beneficial for your life. And then the last part, which again I think is very relevant for those regulators that are in the room, is how programmable tokens are. So sometimes we think about living assets that, however, are working in silos. So there is a lot of work that has to be done afterwards in terms of, settlements or in terms of reporting. Well, in the token economy, all those parts are within the token itself, and this is a huge, huge important, aspect of it. I think the last point that I would make in this consideration is the fact that this new system, which is tokenization, is something that is maybe new to some of the traditional financial, actors in this space, but it's not something new for the crypto industry and the players like Kraken. We've been doing this for over a decade, if you think about it. And at the end of the day, we use the technology that is behind the digital asset world, and we're bringing it to the traditional markets. I think this is going to be the real disruption.
And we know that Kraken is very innovative in terms of product offerings. I think it was alluded to tokenized equity equities already, but also a plethora of other on-chain products. How would you sort of characterize the benefits of these products and in terms of what they're bringing to investors, especially retail investors?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as we said, those assets that we're bringing on-chain and in tokenized world are assets that would normally be static, so we're now transforming them. And I think there are two kind of buckets within the tokenization part that are very relevant. So tokenization can do two things. It can upgrade products that are already there, so innovate products that are already there, and this is what we've been doing. For example, at Kraken, we've launched a version of tokenized equities. We call it X-Stocks. It's new, it's live in Europe as well, so we are an entity that is registered with a MiFID license in one of the EU member states. X-Stocks is, at the end of the day, the ability of buying a token version of an actual equity, but with the benefits that we have just discussed, so 24/7 kind of ability to purchase it, the ability of self-custody, the token itself, the fractionability of it, so the ability of buying it with 10, 15 euros, and you can already access that market that before was hard to reach. So that is one angle, and that I think is one of the things that excites us a lot. But then there is another angle to tokenization and innovation in products, and it's the ability of thinking of new products that do not exist as of today. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, for example, about micro-investing. That is something that some neobanks are trying to do. So the idea that, for example, you can have spare change and you invest it. That normally happens either weekly or monthly, at least in Europe as of today. Imagine in the token economy, we are going to be able, to pay a coffee €1.20 and immediately invest the 80 cents into a tokenized, atomic, instant investment. And that is going to be disruptive. I think that is something that we don't see out there yet, but it's going to be cool.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential when it comes to mobilizing funds. Carsten, how would you sort of react from a regulatory perspective to those two, broadly speaking, categories of new products that Alessandro just talked about, tokenized equities and micro-investing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, on the tokenized instruments themselves, it goes kind of back to the regulatory framework, right? Like intuitively, I think what we would like to see is, and I think that's where the US headed is, equity is equity, regardless whether it's in tokenized form or in securitized form, whatever it may be, or in paper form. And then the regulatory treatment should be the same. There are obstacles to that right now in the system. I understand then the package may address some of them, but not to a full extent as I understand it. So there we probably still have some work to do. On the atomic kind of investing then immediately whatever is left of the euro to the coffee you buy. I mean that personally sounds great to me, but probably for retail investors to really get into it, you probably need more than that as well, right? Because I think what you're offering at the moment is, okay, fair enough, there may be some American instruments which otherwise are difficult to get hold of directly, so there is the benefit of doing that in the tokenized version, but for then the European market to move to a complete version of a tokenized economy, I don't quite see that we're there yet to have the narrative to really, promote that kind of transition.
I mean, perhaps the benefits will increase and become more transparent as more investors, more real economy actors, more companies, more financial institutions go on chain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I take the point, and I think you're right to some extent, and there is a distinction, an international component to it that maybe we can touch upon later. But one of the angles that I would say is that we are a little bit on uncharted territories, right? And when you talk about innovation, we really need to think about it as an instrument for development of those markets that we are talking about. So when we launched this X-Stocks, for example, we didn't really know how much was the appetite out there, and it's a bit what innovators do and what companies like Kraken do, right? So you try to see whether it is a product that sticks and it is of the interest of the consumers and the citizens of a certain jurisdiction. so far, we have been seeing a considerable uptake, and I think that is promising. And this is true not only for tokenized equities, but it's true for tokenizing other real-world assets that are out there. And we've seen it, for example, with in the United States with treasuries and the BlackRock kind of activities, which have reached $1 billion in a short period of time. I think that is up to the consumer at some point to decide whether a product works, as long as it fits the rails of regulation, and it's something that is very well explained, and the risks are understood.
Yeah. And if I can chime in, I was going to say, of course, in traditional markets, as a retail investor these days, you can also get a pretty good deal when it comes to fees and indeed in the weekly or monthly executions and what have you. In this space, then, it is true, though, as well, that if you ask the ordinary retail investor in terms of, what do they know about tokenized stocks, then there's probably a lot more uptake on what you're doing, what Robinhood is doing compared to the entities that you have under the DLT pilot regime, which probably then also tells your story.
Yeah, and I think if I can, just comment on this very quickly, I think it is also a question of how much we're going to be able to explain it to consumers and to citizens out there. So I don't think we are trying to replace anything. We're just adding options for people, and that's only positive to me.
And Alessandro, if you're able to comment on any outstanding regulatory barriers to these new products, are there any that you would want to direct to the audience's attention?
Look, I would take the question under a different angle, and I would look at what's happening around the world. I think that's interesting and speaks in itself about what regulation can do. So regulation can definitely foster credibility. Also for companies like Kraken. I mean, we've been, with Mika, we've been supporters since day one, because it gives that clarity that is giving you space to operate, and then the ability for citizens to, be trusting in a product that is out there. So if we look at the world, when it comes to tokenization, we see the UK, for example, that is now working on a sandbox, and they really put together industry and regulators and at political level to try to understand what are the gaps and how to move forward. If we look at the United States, as we mentioned, where regulation is a little bit less complicated sometimes, let's put it this way, we see an uptake when it's the market that dictates the system and the products. I'm not saying that is necessarily the best of the words, but I think that is an angle of it. And then if you look around the world, even countries, I'm thinking about the GCC and the Middle East, for example, that are a little bit more skeptical about the crypto world and the crypto trading. They are, however, looking at tokenization. So, for example, Qatar has still crypto as being banned, but they have developed a tokenization framework because they think this is going to be the real, forward thinking. And like that, there are many other countries from Singapore to Hong Kong. So what regulations and what I think regulators should think about in Europe, and I have, I'm not here to teach or to preach, but I think the interesting bit in that is that we should think of innovation and regulation as a highway, and we should try to put products on that highway that respect the boundaries. But our German friends teach us that if the highway is straight, you don't need speed limits, and that's, I think, one of the angles that we should think about.
Yeah, I mean, Carsten, any thoughts on kind of improving pan-European highways? I mean, we do know that there, I think, are 16 entrants in the digital security sandbox in the UK, which is a pretty comparable regime to the DLT pilot regime, but maybe with a bit more flexibility. And the pilot regime currently has 6 entrants, which is, also very positive, but maybe the proposals tomorrow will unleash the floodgates even further. What can Europe do to be more ambitious, Carsten?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as a German, I'm not sure I agree on the speed limit not necessary on the highway. Maybe in the minority on that. I decidedly I don't want to do the usual European thing of everything's terrible and everywhere else in the world everything is better, because it's clearly not. Yeah. We are as ESMA, in support of the DLT pilot regime. No doubt it has its limitations that were, discussed among us and in the previous panel, but, some of those will be addressed then, I assume, once the proposal comes out tomorrow. So it should become more attractive, it should become more scalable. However, it is still a pilot regime, and, a pilot regime at level 1 in itself, is a difficult product, because whenever you want to change something, you run into a process which takes years. And I think in the leaked proposal that I'm sure we've all seen, I think the next review is then foreseen for 2031, if I remember correctly. And of course, 2031 is a long way out. So, I'm wondering then, in between, if there is something else that could be done to create these sort of integrated EU framework. I take the point of, yes, indeed, ideally, at national level, the e-securities laws, they are all aligned, but I am wondering, in the recommendation or communication from March from the Commission, there was a reference to the 28th regime, and then, can this not be a nice test case indeed for the 28th regime to, start on a European foot from the outset?
And do you have any ideas as to, obviously exploring this idea of a 28th regime, should it be confined to DLT securities only, or perhaps broader to also traditional securities? Is that something that should be tested within the pilot regime?
Yeah, that would be good, but, I'm looking at some of my standard interlocutors from the traditional regime, and, it's a tough one there to indeed, engage into. Those are the barriers that we're, dealing with for the last 20 years or something. And, so far we haven't quite managed to break them down.
Yeah, I think when you kind of look across the regulation of DLT securities, a lot of the issues actually stem from the traditional regime, right? And are just kind of extensions of existing problems. So I think just kind of turning to the audience, happy to take any questions from the room or from online, if there are any. Very shy audience.
Thank you. My name is Miklos. I work with Bybit, and I must say that we support the idea of the high regulatory standard and potentially essential supervision, if that is the decision of the national competent authorities and member states and the key institutions. However, the question lies in the implementation and whether the ESMA would be prepared to handle all the work that comes along. So my question would be, how do you envisage to see that implemented, and what would be the timeline to your liking?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's clearly, we get to hear the argument a lot now these days where, the proposals have been leaked and it's becoming more concrete, yet, ESMA doesn't have the expertise and the manpower to do these various jobs foreseen. And that's true, of course not. We don't have 100 people locked away in the basement who we're letting out once the competence is there. So of course this needs to be built up over time. And then I think from what I remember from in the proposal, I think that is indeed foreseen to, gradually scale up then, so the central supervision would start, say, in 29, and then ESMA would gradually indeed also build up its people, its the number of people working there, which should still be, compared to what you have in 27 authorities, should be, there should be fewer staff, but clearly then, cooperation with the national supervisors will still be essential. Convergence will still be essential, because we're still going to live in any case in a fragmented environment, and therefore, I don't think it's the case that we then take over absolutely everything, but it will be very much the case for a cooperative endeavor there.
I think we forget that ESMA is only around 10 years old, right?
2011, 12.
11, 12. I don't know any other 11 or 12-year-olds who's doing as much, but certainly learning and growing. And
It started in 2011. That's right.
2011. Any other questions? There's one.
Is it on? Do you hear me?
This one. Number 6, I think.
6.
Okay, hi again. I'm Melanie Moore from the Crypto Risk Metrics, and I'm having a question maybe a little bit off topic regarding your communication around white paper requirements and XBRL from last week. Do only white papers handed in after 25th of December this year need to adhere to the XBRL standards, or also the ones already handed in and notified before?
I think it's a question around grandfathering of white papers.
Yeah, I'm afraid that is one question that I would have to take away, and then feel free to contact me bilaterally.
Okay, I definitely will, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Well, I think if you wanted to kind of take maybe 1 second to share a final view with the audience on what you think is needed to really kind of reach the tokenization end state, what would be your advice, Alessandro?
Yeah, thank you, Coco. I think I would take it from this perspective. Look, today the crypto market cap, I checked it this morning, is around 3 trillion, which is also something that the commissioner mentioned earlier. It's big. Bitcoin is in the top 10, assets for market cap today. But if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's a drop in the ocean. If we look at tokenization, by 2030, I was reading a couple of articles. The most conservative, views are that the market is going to be around 3 trillion US dollar market cap. The most optimistic ones say it will go up to 16, 18 trillions by 2030. This is the real change, and this is going to be where it's going to be happening. So tokenization is not for the 3 trillion, it's for the 20 trillions. And if that's the overview that we have by 2030, I think we should all work together to build an ecosystem in Europe where, we keep innovation here, fairly and well regulated, but we keep it in here. That's my hope.
So huge opportunities for growth, but also for integration as well. And Carsten, any final words for the audience?
Yeah, very quickly, I guess, I can see the developments maybe then indeed in fixed income or also on the fund side, but then for the equity market, I still think there is work to be done to then develop a clear plan, a clear way forward. And on the regulatory side, I think I said before what I would see there as helpful, and then see what happens tomorrow then and beyond.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your insights. If you could join me in thanking the panelists for this very informative session.